for setting this up. And as Glenn said, it was a great, actually, I was really looking forward to that trip for various reasons. I'd heard a lot about the city, and I've always enjoyed my trips to Poland, and I'd timed it with another trip, if you remember, to Sweden, hot on the heels of Toruń. All that fell through, but here we are, and it's great. It's great to see 180 people in the room. So let's get on with it. I'm in Spain at the moment. It's a kind of wet, late autumn day. I've just had lunch. I have the remnants of my lunch on the table in front of me. You have to guess what it is that I'm eating by asking me yes, no questions. So starting from now, in the chat window. Is it pasta? Is it spicy? No, it's not. Does it contain meat? No, it doesn't. Is it green? Yeah, there is a green tint. Did you eat rice? Is it typically Spanish? Yes, it is. Is it tortilla? No, it isn't. Is it salad? Does it have eggs in it? I think it does, actually. Is it eaten hot? Does it grow on a tree? Is it potatoes? There's a kind of potato connection. Does it have fish in it? No, it doesn't. Does it grow on a tree? Is it paella? No, it isn't. Is it Russian guacamole? No, it isn't. Is it tortilla española? No, it isn't. It's the end of the meal. I'll give you a clue. It's the last dish of the meal. Does it have fish? No. Is it an omelette? No, it's not. Coffee. I've had coffee. Is it sweet? Yes, Sandy, it's sweet. It's not dulce de leche. Is it flat ice? Not ice cream. It is sweet. It's Toruń. No, but you're getting warm. Is it flat? Creme brulee? Oh, I'm going to have to show you. You know what these are? Can you see them? Whoop. This is a typical Catalan autumn sweet made of almond paste, flour, crushed almonds, and or sweet potatoes, called panellets in Catalan, little cakes, little breads. Absolutely delicious. So here we have one which is made, the flavor is raspberry, and this one is the green one, and that's kind of green tea is the flavoring. So these are kind of postmodern panellets. The traditional ones are covered in pine nuts. Okay, brilliant. That got us going. Just checking the technology here. That was the first activity I wanted to demonstrate. Whoops. No, I don't want that. I want this, and I want from the beginning. There we go. So that's the topic, and we've got 45 minutes or so to cover it. In fact, I'll try and get it through a little bit quicker, so there is time for questions. That was a guessing game, obviously, and guessing games are part of what I call a generic activity type, which works just as well online as it does in the real classroom. Here's another one. So here's a picture. I'm one person in this picture. You have to ask questions using the structure. Are you the person who? Are you the person who? Are you the person who? So again, in the chat box, hang on, let me choose somebody. Okay, off you go. Are you the person who has a suntan? Probably. No, I'm not the person in the sailing boat. I'm not the person who's in the water. Just let me check. How close am I? Oh, I am in the water. Yeah. But there's plenty of people in the water. Are you the person saying, no, I'm not the person saying, are you the person kicking the ball? Yes, I'm the person kicking the ball. Yes, do you see me there with my red and white striped shorts? Very good, okay. Into groups, into breakout rooms, whatever, do the same thing, yeah? Classic guessing game, brilliant. Here's another one. Let's just go back to the room. If you can see me on speaker view, which I think you can, I don't really have any choice. Have a look at everything you see there, because in a second, I'm going to switch the camera off and I'm going to change 3 things. Now, and you have to work out what I've changed. Are you ready? Okay, camera's going off. Had a good look. Camera's going off. Okay, you ready? Okay, before I put the camera back on again, just guess what I've changed, yeah, by writing into the chat box. You've done such and such. You've, no, cups is not enough. Alex, you moved the balls, you removed the plant. The plant, no, the plant has to be a sentence. You've taken off your glasses. You've chosen the toothpaste. You put a wig on, or the creative language work going on here. Okay, you've moved the cups and ways. Everybody's fixated on the cups or the vases, the vases. Okay, okay, you ready? You're going to have a look. You see what I've eaten the cake. I haven't eaten the cakes. Okay, what have I changed? Yeah, I got a jacket on. Anything else? I've changed a cup. Yeah. You put a jacket, you put on a jacket. Well, you put a yeah, well, this the third thing though, the cup and the jacket, some books. No, nothing to do with the books. I did remove them. Different glasses. Yeah, you see? Okay, got to take those ones off. Can't see a thing. Take the jacket off too, because it's far too hot in here. Okay. It's interesting that actually, I've done that so many times now recently, and how the choice of structure varies. So it's, and of course the beauty of this kind of activity is you don't want to prescribe the structure. You want to say you have to use the present perfect, because it's equally viable to say you removed a bowl. It just goes to show you can't, there's no one single activity in the world which, unless you put the words into the student's mouth. I'm not so crazy about that, but there's a case for that. So let's go back to the presentation. So these are all generic guessing games, and there's hundreds of them. You know, what's my line? You think of a job, you have to ask them yes, no questions. Do you work outdoors? Do you wear a uniform? Do you use tools, etc.? For younger learners, I'm an animal or a bird or a reptile, you know, so questions. And again, you could brainstorm the questions or some typical questions beforehand, like, do you have, or have you got wings? Do you have 4 legs? Do you lay eggs? That kind of thing. Useful language. And off we go. Of course, you can never predict the vocabulary that the students will need, but that you just have to feed in on the trot, I think, really. And then maybe keep a record of it and come back to it. See, these are some of the words you needed for this activity. A famous person, of course, alive or dead. You can give clues. So here's 5 nouns, perhaps, that relate to my weekend, the last weekend I had. So you've got to try and guess from those nouns, or they could be verbs, what it is I did, and so on. So that's a kind of archetypal, classical communicative activity, which seems to work just as well online as it does in the real classroom. What's this? Where's my chat window? It's a triangle. Good. Okay. A little bit of geometry coming up. And what about this? Yep. And what about this? It's a circle. Yeah. And what about this one? It's a rectangle. Okay, great. Where is the triangle in relation to the square? It's next to it, to the left. Yeah, okay, both answers to the left, more exact. So sentence, the triangle is next to or to the left of the square. Where's the circle in relation to the square? The circle in relation to the square. It's to the right. Good. It's to the right. Thank you. I like full sentences. It's to the right of the square. Good. Where's the rectangle in relation to the square? It's under, it's below. It's under, it'll do. I'll accept both answers. Great. And where is the square in relation to the triangle and the circle? Okay, give me a sentence, Elena. Yep, it's between them. Yep, yep, between. People are so lazy when they're, it's amongst the shapes, that's true. Okay, good. So we have the vocabulary sorted out, okay? Now I'm going to draw a combination, an arrangement of these shapes, and I'm going to dictate it to you. So all you have to do is, with handy pen and paper, which you should have at your grasp, is to draw the arrangement that I describe. Okay, are you ready? Okay, so there's a rectangle in the middle. To the right of the rectangle, there's a triangle. Inside, we didn't do inside, but inside the triangle is a circle. To the left of the rectangle is a square. And inside the square, there is a triangle. Okay? So now, if we were in an online classroom and you had your cameras on, then I would simply ask you to, whoops, what's going on here? Here we go. To show me, yeah, what you've drawn. And this is what you should have had. Yeah? Next stage, you do it to each other. Yeah? So again, into breakout rooms or whatever, taking turns. You can either use the whiteboard if you can draw on it. I find it really difficult. Or just, draw on a piece of paper and show it, hold it up to the camera. Okay, in a real classroom, the next stage is the best stage, I think, but you can't really do it online. And that's where you have two teams. And you must know this one. So you have two teams. You have a representative from each team at the board. The board's divided in two. Representatives each have a pen. Then you show to the rest of the class, to the two teams, the arrangement that you've pre-drawn, and they have to describe it to their representative at the board, who draws it, and the first team to get the correct arrangement up gets a point. It's a riot. I did this in, I remember when I first did this in IH London, actually. I had teachers banging on the wall because of the noise. There was one Moroccan woman who was weeping with laughter. And I mean, it's so communicative. And of course, more complicated the drawing is, the more difficult it is to communicate. It doesn't have to be arrangements of squares and circles. It could be like any kind of describe and draw activity. It could be an arrangement. It could be a drawing of a room with furniture, sofas, chairs, tables, etc. It could be a landscape or whatever. In fact, speaking of landscape, I did this with a group of teachers I'm training online at the moment who are working in Jordan. And this is an example that she produced for her geography kind of themed class. So it's an island with trees, a boat, etc. And what's interesting is that she included text. So she dictated, so what you have on the left is the teacher's drawing, what you have on the right is one of the students' drawings. Now this is done online. This is done online. So she took a photo of it. But what's interesting is that she's integrated text into the drawing, which is not something I suggested, but I love the idea. So it's a kind of combination of picture dictation and real dictation. It's a kind of multimodal version of describe and draw. So I kind of really, really like that. Describe and choose, I call this, because they're not drawing, but they've got a number of pictures, as you can see there. These archetypal communicative activities. So choosing from 6 different faces. They describe one of them to their neighbor. The neighbor has to listen and guess which one it is. So it's a kind of mixing of describe and draw with a guessing game component. Yeah, so the two things coming together in this, as I say, iconic communicative activity. And of course, again, you can raise the ante. You can make it more or less difficult depending on the level of the students or their particular interest by giving them more or less difficult pictures to describe. So here's 7 still lives, easily accessed using any image search program that you have. So these happen to be the things that come up with, if you Google famous still life paintings, images of. Or you could do something even more complicated if you've got people with a technical bent describing imaginary machines. Now, here's another activity that I kind of love from real classrooms. A colleague taught me this, and I used it with my teens classes a lot. And I call it "What's Matilda Doing Now?" because that's the example I use. But I've also called it sentence Pictionary. You know Pictionary, the game, the word game. So again, another team game where teams are given a word and one person has to draw the word and their team has to guess, and the first one to guess the word is the winner. Well, this is a variation of the same, but it's sentences. So you give them a model, in this case, the answer to the question, what's Matilda doing now? And they have to draw they have to draw the picture to elicit the sentence from their team. So in this case, she's riding a bike. Yeah. So in a classroom, how this is structured is you have your teams. You can have as many teams as you want. Shouldn't be too big. Your representatives come to the front. You show them either a picture or the sentence, but making sure that the vocabulary is within their kind of joint competence. I mean, that's important. They rush back to their team and they start drawing, and their team starts shouting suggestions. Yeah. And then having done that, you elicit back all the sentences that have been done, that you've used, say the 6 sentences or whatever. And then you've got a model on the board of the structure of the day. So this is a more recent example. I mean, a more topical example. What hasn't she done since last? Okay, so for example, can you give me a sentence? Well, in fact, there's the date too. Yeah, thank you, Sandy. Matilda hasn't been to the zoo. Yeah, and we're going to add since January. Great. Okay, but that picture, Alan, you're running away. Alan, you're running away. Okay, so that's the example. Now I'm going to draw. I could do the whiteboard, as I say, and they will if they can in the breakout rooms, of what she hasn't been able to do since whenever. So this is, can you see that? So this is, if I was drawing this for my group, this is what I would draw. How are we going? Can you see that? No. Yes. Marie, she hasn't been to the cinema. Good, fantastic. You see, that's the cinema. Yeah. She hasn't been to the cinema since, okay, let's say January. Yeah. So they do that in their groups, in the breakout room, and then they share the sentences they've produced in the main room, if you like. And then, of course, you can put them onto the board, and then you can add suggestions as to what goes into the various slots in the substitution table, essentially. So that's how I've adapted sentence Pictionary for online. It doesn't have, again, it's difficult to build in that team competitive development. If anybody's got any suggestions how you would do that, please let me know. But the breakout rooms do not lend themselves to competitive team activities, unless I'm completely wrong. Okay, so those are two versions, or different versions of two archetypal communicative activities: guessing games and describe and draw. And I want to look at, if I've got time, 8 more. But I want to, this talk is, what's it called? 10 communicative activities that work online. Notice it's not 10 online activities that happen to be communicative. No, it's 10 communicative activities. I'm interested in communicative activities, whether they work in the class or whether they work online. They've got to be communicative. What do I mean by that? I mean, and here I'm using a kind of rubric that's been around for a very long time and I've always been very fond of, because it's 5 criteria for these kinds of activities, what they call creative automatization activities. These are kind of moving away from just repetition activities like drilling, but they're still controlled activities that provide room for creativity within quite tight constraints. And for these writers, these 2 Canadian scholars, they have 5 criteria, and I think these are great. And they've been, as I said, they've been around for as long as you have. But one is that they'd be genuinely communicative. Now, what does that mean, genuinely communicative? We use this term as if it was like, but does it mean this? Is that genuinely communicative? Or does it mean this? In which case, what is the difference? What's the difference between picture A and picture B? For 5 points. Okay, Irina, yes, in a word. In B, there's listening. In A, there's not listening. It's just 2 people speaking. So picture A is what I would call interactive, which is good. You know, we like interaction, but it's not enough. It's not enough if they're not listening to each other. Picture B is communicative. They have to listen, they have to process. They can't ignore what the other person's saying. So a typical interactive activity might be 2 students reading a dialogue. Yeah, it's in the book. They read it aloud. They don't have to listen to each other. They just have to wait till the other person's lips stop moving, then they do their bit. But B, describe and draw or guessing games, they have to listen. They have to listen. They have to process. That's truly communicative. And there's so many reasons why that is better than just purely interaction. Paper conversation, I mean, I'm sorry, you guys, you've heard this from me so many times, but I just love this activity. I did it at the beginning of every lesson. Students, it's like texting, except they're writing on a piece of paper. So this is my teenagers in Spain. Off they go, 2 of them, and they're passing the paper backwards and forwards. And they're having a conversation, but it's written. And that allows me as the teacher to go around making on-the-spot suggestions, corrections, or whatever. So, hello, Pablo. Hello, Albert. What did you do last weekend? Albert says it isn't your problem. And I'm thinking, business, actually, we would say. Then I think, oh, hang on. No, there's an idiom. There's a much better expression, really perfect for adolescent boys. Mind your own business. Yeah. So I write that in. Did you see the Spain-Belgium match? Boys talking about football, of course. I enjoyed it. So this goes on for pages. Paper conversation, absolutely brilliant. You can use it. You take them off them. You look at them overnight. You find interesting stuff, etc. It's all the data that you need as a teacher can be generated by these conversations. Of course, you can give a topic if you want. You can focus it. But in this case, it was just like, it's the chat. It's the beginning of the lesson chat, but it happens to be written down. Now, that's so easy to replicate online with a chat box that I'm not even going to insult your intelligence by telling you how you could do this in lots of different ways, both in breakout rooms or in your general room or whatever. So that's generally communicative. They should be psychologically authentic. What does that mean? It's because when we're using language in the real world, we actually offer under considerable pressure. Yeah, there's the pressure of real time. There's maybe some kind of tension involved because of the situation. There may be social hierarchical issues involved in terms of finding the right degree of formality, etc., or usted kind of issues, and so on. Now, one of the things, of course, we don't perhaps do enough in the real classrooms is to get students on their feet. I mean, they do a lot of their speaking practice sitting down, but of course, in real life, we're standing up a lot of the time. So the idea of psychological authenticity is to recreate in the classroom as near as you can the kind of the normal psychological pressures felt by people engaged in real communication. Now, there's lots of ways you can do that. As I say, in a real classroom, they can stand up and go public. Yeah, so having done the activity in the breakout room, bring it back to the main room, and they do it again in front of everybody. That's raising the ante a bit. Put a time limit on it. So you have to do it now. What you just did, that speaking activity, but you have to do it in half the time, because they can time each other using their phones or whatever. We'll come back to that point perhaps in a minute. I'm just kind of marching through focused. And by focus, they mean there should be some kind of communicative point to it. This is how they describe that. These kinds of activities should be designed around a basic functions and notions that learners like to handle, such as directing, describing. And by this way, describe and draw. Describing is actually a really important function for most students at most levels, whether it's for general purposes or for academic purposes or whatever, but also narrating and all those kind of social functions like apologizing, complaining, etc., requesting, and so on. That's the focus. Formulaic. Now, this is a kind of really important, and they foresaw in 1988 the fact that a lot of language, a vast amount of language that we produce, particularly spoken language, is formulaic. And now we can use corpora to find out what the most common formula are. So, this was just a simple search to see what are the most common formulaic expressions with ever. Yeah, I've ever seen, I've ever had, have you ever been, have you, with ever as the third word in a 4-slot formula. And of course, look at that. Have you ever heard? Have you ever been? Have you ever seen? Are the most common verbs in questions. Have you ever been? Have you ever seen? Have you ever heard? And of course, this calls to mind a very formulaic but classic communicative activity, which is find someone who. Find someone who's been to China. Have you ever been to China? Have you ever been to China? Have you ever been to China? The students are going around asking these questions, and then they embark on and of course you can give them different prompts, different students, different prompts. And very importantly, at the end of the activity, they report back to the class. So that's raising the ante, the report stage. I'll come back to that maybe in a minute. We won't bother with that. This is another classic. Oh God, I wish I'd invented this. The number of times I've promoted this activity and I still don't know who invented it. One of us, two of us, three of us, all of us can. And then they go into their breakout rooms and they generate as many sentences as they can, true sentences about their group. Now, how are they going to do that? They're going to have to ask each other questions. Yeah? Can you speak Spanish? Can you speak Polish? Can you stand on your head? Can you juggle? Can you speak, can you dance the tango and that kind of thing? And they come back and they report, and it generates a huge number of sentences which are constrained by the box, but are creative and as creative as they want to be with the vocabulary they've got. And of course, you can change the structure. And here's another one again, coming back to our friend Matilda. One of us hasn't been, haven't been to the movies, hasn't been to a restaurant since. I haven't been on a plane since February. It's amazing for me. And my carbon footprint is this big now. No, it's this small. It used to be that big. Okay. And finally, repetition. Yeah, you can't learn anything without repeating. But not just repetition of individual sentences or individual words, but repetition of the whole task is also very important. As Martin Bygate says, researchers have been looking at task repetition when you do the task a second time, a third time, a fourth time, how important that is. And so often in the classroom, we get students to do a task, but we don't get them to repeat it. Why? Because we think it's going to be boring. But it's not necessarily if you just keep moving people around. Now, you can do this in a real classroom by different ways. This is from Jim Scrivener's book. You can create buzz groups, so people change groups occasionally. They move to a different group. So the task is the same, but the group slightly changes. Or the partners are the same. The task is the same, but the partners are different in the wheel. So the outside wheel is moving around at a cue from the teacher. So the task might be to describe your family using a photo, or to describe your business or whatever. And they get masses of opportunities to repeat the task. And that's so good. It's so much research. So to do that in the classroom using kind of survey type activities, a survey activity is where, first of all, the students in groups generate questions. So the theme might be sport or health or whatever, nutrition. And they generate questions. So they're going to ask everybody in the class, do you exercise regularly? And that kind of thing. They generate the questions and they move to another group. They redistribute it so they can ask their questions. Now that's easily done using breakout rooms, using the recreate function in Zoom, for example. Then they go back to their group and they collate what they've found from having interviewed everybody in smaller groups. And then when they go back, they'll be able to talk about the whole class, and then they report to the class what they've found. Now, of course, I don't know, but this stage is really difficult in breakout rooms, to get them back to their original breakout rooms without assigning them. Or if anybody knows a quick way of doing that, that would be great. But sometimes you might just have to miss that stage and go from the smaller group then to the report stage. That's okay. It's okay. But it's, these are things we have to learn to live with, breakout rooms and their limitations. And then, of course, you can give them a rubric to make their report, to fashion their report around. So one person said that, some people comment, nobody reported, a lot of people mentioned, etc. That's kind of important. That, again, gives them a scaffold, if you like, and it also provides them with useful language that they might not otherwise have used. Instead of said, no, try some other reporting verbs. So those are the 5 criteria that these 2 researchers came up with, and I think they're great. I would want to add a couple more that since 1988 have been around, and this 6th one is the notion of it being pushed. Learners need to be pushed, and it relates to point 2 about psychological authenticity. They need to be put in situations where they are pushed to the edge of their competence. It's not enough for students just to do an activity that's very easy and pleasant, but they don't actually, and the notion of push is defined here by Meryl Swain. The key words there, do it again, but do it more precisely, that is to say more accurately, more coherently, which includes pronunciation, and appropriately. Change the register if need be. So doing the task, it's again, repeating the task with that extra bit of push. And the push can obviously come from, first of all, rehearsing the activity and then actually performing the activity to the full class. And of course, classically look at these adorable little, this is my show and tell. So I'm going to tell you about these. You see, these are little, they're ceramic heads, You see, they're made by a friend of mine who's a potter, ceramicist, and they're very topical, as you can see, because each one is wearing a little face mask. And I like them because they're cute. Also, they're functional. You can use them to play board games, but they're also kind of topical, relevant to the circumstances in which we're all in at the moment. So that's my show and tell. You can ask me questions, etc. We don't have time, but if I were doing this online, I would give them, or in the classroom too, give them a rubric like this. This is Nick Bilbrough of the Hands Up Project doing a show and tell with a whole mass of people on a Saturday morning workshop, and they all do it, and they have this rubric, and it's a great way of raising, again, the ante, a bit of push, which is good for you. And then, you know, the question and answer stage is actually the most important, because that's what you can't anticipate. So even if students read aloud their presentation, which they often do, unfortunately, you need to discourage that. But the question and answer stage, they can't really read aloud. Okay, so being pushed, and then the activity should require some kind of deep processing at the cognitive level. They should, this is part of push, but I define it slightly separately. And here's a longish quote, I'll let you read. Okay, so the key there is the longer that, you know, the more that we actively work on a problem, the more that we engage cognitively, the more likely we are of storing the information permanently. And I think a great example of that is the dictogloss techniques. The dictogloss technique, as I'm sure you know, dictogloss used to be called dictocomp, grammatic dictation, where the students hear in its entirety a short text, and then they reconstruct it from memory. Now, they can't do that by remembering every word in the text, but they can remember, they can hold an image in their mind of what the text creates, and then they can reconstruct it by putting words to that image individually initially, and then collaboratively. And that's where the deep processing is. And any research that's been done of dictoglosses shows that the really valuable stages in the collaborative work that they do trying to reconstruct the text. So here would be a text would be perfect for dictogloss. So it's a little poem translated from the Japanese. They hear it once. They don't do anything while they're listening, just listen. Create a mental image. Now write, yeah, they write. I'd do this with you if we had time in a chat box even. I mean, it's not, if you have not done it before, it's magical the way that the text emerges once you put them into groups to try and work on their, they don't hear it again. They only hear it that first time. Recreate individually, go into breakout rooms, compare, come up with a consensus version, bring it back to the main room, put it onto the board, have everybody make adjustments to it. And the text emerges almost like a photograph emerges when you're developing it from absolutely zero into a perfect image. And it's so good for deep processing because they get the words, but they've got to put the grammar in that's missing. And this text is an amazing text. I've chosen it deliberately because of its use of articles. If you look at the articles, and for anybody who has trouble with articles, definite or indefinite or zero, you can learn everything there is to know about the article system in English from this text, everything. Yeah? So why is it zero article for pink blossoms, but definite article for cherry trees? Why is it spring snow when snow is uncountable? And why is it a white coat, not the white coat or zero white coat? It's all there. It's all there in that text, everything you need to know. So you can use the text, the skill of reconstructing the text as a springboard into doing whatever grammar work you want to do on the text itself. Okay, I'm not going to go into that now, but yeah, there's masses of things you can do with, okay, and another kind of activity, if the students all share the same first language, which is very similar to dictogloss, well, there's a textogloss. Textogloss is when you show them the text and they have to, then you turn it off and then they have to reconstruct it from memory. So they're not listening, they're reading. So I just beam this up, yeah, for a minute max, then take it off. And then they go into their breakout rooms and they try and reconstruct it. Unfortunately, if students get too used to this activity, they'll start just taking screenshots, and they're not really doing the deep processing. So, you have to kind of spring it on them. That's what I call a text-to-gloss. You heard it here first. The other kind of what I call reconstruction activity in the same sort of genre of activities is two-way translation. Oh, don't I love translation? Oh, and this is such deep processing because no two languages are the same. So grappling with the differences is fantastic. So you give them an English text like that poem, they translate it into Polish if that's their first language. Then you take the original text away and they have to translate it back into English. It's so simple. And it's really good learner training, something they can do on their own. And you can do this very, very easily online. And then you compare the original text with their translation. Yeah? You get the process. So first of all, translate into Polish, translate it back into English, compare it with the original text. So much mileage you can get out of this. And here's where the text can be slightly longer than what you would normally use in a dictogloss, not too long. How are we going for time? I'm not even sure where I'm meant to finish now, but we're winding up. I think I've done we'll do a count in a second. Here's one more, which I call collaborative writing. Now, this is deep processing also. Any collaborative writing activity usually involves students kind of teaching each other, basically, which they do with a dictogloss, which is after all, it's collaborative writing. This is one of my favorite in-class activities. I don't have a name for it. I call it paper interviews, I guess. So this is the situation. You're in a class, real classroom. And you've got to imagine how this would work online. You're in a real classroom. You tell your students something like, for example, last weekend, I went to Portugal. That was like in another life. Last weekend, I went to Portugal. Or you write that on the board. That's the title of the text. The students are going to have to write that text in groups. Yeah? How are they going to do that? They're going to have to ask you questions because they didn't know a thing. Now, how are they going to ask you questions? They're not going to ask you in speech. They're going to write them on slips of paper. Give them the slips of paper. They work on groups. They generate questions. They bring the questions one at a time to you. You write the answer on the slip of paper. If the question is not well phrased, you can send it back, or you can correct it or suggest corrections, etc. Once they've got enough information, then they use those answers to organize the slips of paper into an order to make a coherent text. So this is what my students in Spain came up with for that very same situation. I've transcribed it for you, but you can see. So this is a text that they've written collaboratively, but with me feeding in the information and also some key language. Notice that at the end there, it says the weather was gloriously hot and he really enjoyed his stay. Now, no student in the world is going to say gloriously hot unprompted. So that was something obviously I fed in. They said, what was the weather like? I wrote it was gloriously hot. The text is brilliant. Now, what's interesting about this is the text for each group is going to be different. Why? Because the questions are different. So there's an intrinsic interest in reading each other's text to see and comparing to see what they found out, what the others didn't. I've been racking my brains to think how you could do this online without all the students seeing all the questions. So the group has to send the questions. Now, apparently from a breakout room, you can't send individualized questions to the teacher. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the only way around this is to use WhatsApp or some other tool which they can communicate, their group communicate to the teacher that the others can't see. Yeah, so that, you see what I mean? But there's answers coming through here. Just let me check. A different Google Doc for each group. Okay. I have to get over my aversion to Google Doc and Google Drive, obviously. I love to, my ideal world is where everything happens in the one place. So I don't like going to WhatsApp or Padlet, all these things. It just complicates life inordinately because there's always one student who can't access the code or blah, blah, and so what happens? And you can't Padlet. Yeah, okay, all right, okay. You win, Padlet, okay. But I would love to be able to think that these activities worked just within one platform. However, here's another one very quickly, acrostic poems. So this is a poem. This is an idea that I read about in the English Language Teaching Journal. You give this, they have to write a poem. The first line of each word, the first letter of each line begins with one of those letters. You see what I mean? And the subject, the topic is school. So this is what a group of students working in Hong Kong produced, working together collaboratively. It's not great poetry, but but the work that went into that was intense. And she, in this article, she has examples from of other words like joy, simple, mother, home, and this is her rationale. So it's push and deep processing and creativity, but within very tight constraints, and that's what with the best creativity. Finally, discussions. I'm not going to talk about those. Giving them statements. If we were in breakout rooms, I'd put you into breakout rooms now, and you would just simply choose one of these statements and discuss it. You don't have to discuss them all. You could start at the end and work forward, or I could assign a different number to each breakout room. And then you come back and report. And when you report, you use reporting structures. I can't overemphasize the importance of providing this kind of framework, this scaffolding, if you like, enough. Really, really important. It's not enough. This is the push. Yeah, they've got to fit their ideas. It's a bit like the acrostic poems. They've got to fit their ideas into this formula. And it's particularly for the higher level students, that's really, really useful. They can't rest on their linguistic laurels. Okay. A warning, a caveat. Trying to make online education the same as face-to-face education may be counterproductive. Maybe we just have to accept that they're different. But I'm not convinced that they are that different. And my point really is to show that, yes, good communicative activities that work in the classroom can be transferred to an online website with some adjustment in some cases and less in others. And here is a kind of summary of the things we looked at, these 10 activities, and my assessment of the ability to adapt them to an online platform like Zoom. But, as I say, it's adapting. Some of the best features of them might not work, like the competitive team element, for example. But while there are breakout rooms, and while there are whiteboards, and while there are chat boxes, particularly, the chat window seems to be the most exploitable for communication, then it's not impossible to design activities which are communicative. And on that note, I'll sign out. And so I'm not sure, Glenn, how we're going in terms of questions. Kata asks in the question, can we find someone who online? I think we can, yes. Again, given the mobility constraints, that they certainly can go from at least one breakout room to another breakout room and be talking to different people. And so that's something. So yeah, I think to a certain extent, depends on the size of your class, how optimal that would be. Anastasia says, hang on, it seems that collecting feedback is an obstacle during online teaching. Well, this is why I like things like the chat, what I call paper conversations, but whether it be chat window conversations that you can collect, you can save the chat window, and then you've got, is that what you mean? You can give feedback, but that's not what you mean. Collecting feedback. I'm not quite sure what you mean, Anastasia. Britannia School asks, a lot of students hesitate to draw. Okay. Yes, so that's why drawing triangles and squares and circles is a good way to start, because everybody can draw a triangle and everybody can draw a circle. And you can even draw them on the whiteboards. I've tried. I mean, you know, they look more or less like triangles and circles. So yeah, I think easy peasy, start with the easy stuff first. Tatiana asks, how do you give language feedback after communicative activities? You make a note of it and then you stop them and then you give them the feedback, I think. I mean, it depends what kind of, if it's a written if there's written data, like in the chat windows, then it's easy enough to, as I said before, save that and then maybe come back the next lesson with some anonymized points. So, you know, some errors that they could correct, or some nice expressions that they could, you could share, and so on. Which activity is my favorite? Elisabetta asks, I think actually, for its simplicity, the paper conversation, it's just so simple and it works so well online, just chatting, but you give them topics and you've got, as I said before, you can save it. And Bob's your uncle. Anastasia, it was about language feedback. Yes, I mean, language feedback is very important and we mustn't neglect it. So at what point you say, okay, you need, you did this very well, but you would do it better if you had used the past tense, since you were talking about what you did last weekend. So let's model that and then go back into different combinations of students and repeat the task. So that cycle of do the task, get some feedback, redo the task. Not necessarily the same person or people, but in a different group. But it goes around and round and round. Task-based learning, exactly. That's it in a word. Okay. Anything else? What's the best way to write corrections online, Kit says, in paper conversation? I guess you just have to intervene and say, you know, you have to butt in and say, I'm not sure, you know, in WhatsApp, you could save the quote, you know, quote the particular thing and then write your correction. Okay, folks. Glenn, it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. Very, very interesting session. I do appreciate it. And I do love a good dictogloss. I must admit, it's something I'm bashing on with all my teachers, telling them dictogloss, dictogloss, dictogloss. But your idea of a textogloss, now that's something. Thank you for that. And also, that text you just showed is very useful as well, especially for teachers here in Poland, because that's one of the main grammar points that Polish learners of English.
Yes, I know, exactly. I suspected as much, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Probably not just Polish learners, but also, you know, Central European, Eastern European learners as well. So thank you very much, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And hopefully one day, post-COVID, you will be able to come to Toruń and visit us.
I hope so too, Glenn. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks everybody for attending and good luck for the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. Okay, all the best.